Dad, how do you do it? Jason's voice sliced through the chatter at the table, loud and deliberate, with the slight slur of someone who'd had just enough wine to loosen their tongue, but not enough to dull the edge. He wasn't drunk. Jason never got drunk, but his words had a sharpness that made everyone stop. I looked up from my plate, taken aback by the sudden shift. Do what? I asked carefully, though my grip on the fork tightened. Keep believing everything's fine when the cracks are right in front of you, Jason said, leaning back in his chair with an unsettling calm. His glass dangled from his hand, nearly empty, the deep red staining his knuckles like blood. The table fell silent. Linda's hand hovered mid-reach for the wine bottle, her expression frozen. Mia and Alex exchanged a look. Quick, panicked glance, before staring down at their plates like the mashed potatoes suddenly required their full attention. Jason stood, his chair scraping against the floor. You know what? Let's make it official. He raised his glass, the faintest wobble in his hand as he spoke. To Dad, he said, the words dripping with something that wasn't admiration. The man who gave everything for this family, who sacrificed more than anyone will ever know, and who somehow still manages to see this family as perfect, even when, he paused, his gaze flickering to the twins, then to Linda, who was now gripping her wine-glass like it was her lifeline, even when it might not be. Jason. Linda's voice was sharp, a warning disguised as concern. But Jason ignored her. Here's to a man who's never asked questions he didn't want the answers to, Jason added, tipping his glass toward me with a strained smile before sitting back down. The words lingered in the air, hanging heavy like a storm cloud about to break. What the hell is that supposed to mean? I asked, my voice low but dangerous. Jason shrugged, his smirk maddeningly nonchalant. Just a toast, Dad. Don't overthink it, Bob. Before I could respond, Alex shot up from his seat, his own glass in hand. Let's not ruin a great night, he said, his voice too loud. Too eager to diffuse the tension, his eyes darted nervously between me and Jason, like a referee about to call time on a fight. Dad deserves better than us fighting over cryptic nonsense. Alex turned to me, his voice softening as he lifted his glass higher. To Dad, for being the glue that holds us all together. Even when, he hesitated, his gaze flickering toward Jason for just a moment before he caught himself. Even when things aren't always as clear as they seem. That hesitation hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just Jason, Alex too. His toast, meant to smooth things over, only fanned the flames. My heart thudded in my chest as doubt began to creep into every corner of my mind. What weren't they telling me? Linda slammed her glass down the table with a force that made us all jump. Enough, she snapped, her voice taut with irritation. This is supposed to be a celebration, not whatever this is. But the damage was done. The warmth of the evening had evaporated, replaced by a suffocating tension that no amount of wine or ladder could fix. Later, once the dishes were cleared and the twins had gone upstairs, I found Jason alone in the kitchen. He was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, the same wine-glass in his hand, now empty. You've had enough, Jason, I said, my tone sharp as I stepped into the room. He raised an eyebrow, his expression calm but distant. You're not here to talk about the wine. You're damn right I'm not, I shot back. What the hell was that toast about? And don't give me any cryptic crap. Tell me the truth. Jason sighed, running a hand through his hair. The alcohol had dulled his sharp edges slightly, but his eyes were still steady, clear. I told you, Dad, you're asking the wrong person. What person? My voice cracked, but I didn't care. What are you talking about? Jason's gaze drifted toward the living room, where Linda was tidying up with an intensity that screamed avoidance. He tilted his head in her direction, his meaning unmistakable. Her, he said simply. The house was quiet now, too quiet. Upstairs. I could hear the faint sound of Mia's laughter mixed with Alex's voice, probably watching something together to unwind after Jason's unsettling toast. Linda was nowhere to be seen. Her usual tactic when things got uncomfortable was to retreat and reappear when the dust had settled. Jason was still in the kitchen when I returned. He had poured himself another drink, his movements slower but not sloppy. He wasn't avoiding me. If anything, he was waiting. Start talking, I said, my voice low but carrying enough weight to show I wasn't playing around. You had your fun at dinner. Now tell me what this is all about. He looked at me for a long moment, swirling the wine in his glass. "It's not my story to tell, Dad," he said finally, his tone softer but no less ominous. "But you're not stupid. You feel it, don't you? The cracks." "Don't lecture me about cracks," I snapped, my patience unraveling. "I've been keeping this family together while you've been off at college pretending to be some philosopher." Jason raised an eyebrow, smirking faintly, but there was no humor in it. "Pretending, that's rich. Coming from someone who's spent years pretending nothing's wrong." I said, stepping closer. "You've been dancing around this all night. If you have something to say, say it." Jason hesitated, his gaze shifting for the briefest moment, almost as if weighing how far he was willing to go. "You're asking the wrong person," he repeated, but this time there was a trace of anger in his voice. "You should be asking Mom." The words hit like a slap, and for a moment the kitchen seemed to spin around me. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. I didn't have to press further because, at that exact moment, Linda appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully composed but her eyes betraying a flicker of unease. "What's going on in here?" she asked, her voice too casual as she crossed her arms and leaned against the doorframe. Her attempt to sound nonchalant only made her presence more conspicuous. "Jason was just finishing telling me why he decided to ruin dinner," I said, not bothering to hide the sarcasm in my voice. Jason chuckled softly, shaking his head as he drained the last of his wine. "I didn't ruin anything. The truth has a way of doing that all on its own." "Jason," Linda said sharply, her tone leaving no room for interpretation. "That's enough." Jason stood, placing the glass down with deliberate care. "You're right," he said, looking between us. "Enough, but not for him." He nodded toward me. "He deserves more." Before I could respond, Jason walked past Linda, pausing only briefly to mutter something under his breath. It was too low for me to catch, but it left Linda's face pale and set in stone. Once he was gone, I turned going on. "What's going?" I asked, my voice tight with frustration. "What does Jason know that I don't?" Linda sighed heavily, brushing her hair back with trembling fingers. "He's being dramatic," she said, forcing a brittle laugh. "You know how he gets after a little too much wine." "Don't do that," I said, stepping closer. "Don't brush this off like it's nothing." He said I should be asking you. "So, I'm asking. What's he talking about?" Her jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought she might crack. But then she straightened, her expression hardening into something almost defiant. "He's just trying to stir up trouble," she said coolly. "You know how Jason is, always looking for a reaction." I studied her face, searching for a crack in the mask she was wearing, but she gave me nothing. Still, the unease bubbling inside me was impossible to ignore. Jason's words, Alex's hesitation, even Maya's nervous glances at dinner, all of it pointed to something deeper, something hidden just out of reach. "Fine," I said finally, stepping back. "If there's nothing to tell, then you won't mind if I talk to the kids tomorrow. Maybe they'll be able to explain why tonight felt like a goddamn funeral." Linda's eyes widened just enough to betray her composure, but she quickly masked it with a sharp glare. "Don't drag the kids into this," she snapped, her voice rising. "They don't deserve to be caught in the middle of whatever paranoia Jason has planted in your head. Maybe I wouldn't have to if you'd just tell me the truth." I shot back. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But then she turned and walked away without another word, leaving me standing in the kitchen, alone with more questions than answers. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake replaying Jason's words, Alex's toast. The way Linda's eyes had darted toward the twins every time the conversation got too close to uncomfortable. By the time the sun began creeping through the blinds, I knew what I had to do. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't me imagining things. Jason's words had planted a seed, and now that seed was growing into something impossible to ignore. The only way to get the truth was to dig for it myself. By the next morning, the weight of the previous night's events had only grown heavier. I couldn't shake the cryptic tone of Jason's toast, the hesitation in Alex's attempt to smooth things over, or Linda's deflection. The way she'd shut down the conversation and walked away gnawed at me. Something was wrong, deeply, irreversibly wrong, and I needed answers. Breakfast was subdued, the kind of silence that wasn't peaceful but tense. like a rubber band stretched too tight. Linda flitted around the kitchen, making coffee and avoiding eye contact. Jason had already disappeared somewhere, probably nursing his wine-induced honesty in private. Mia and Alex ate quietly, their usual playful banter noticeably absent. I waited until Maya left to take a call from a friend, and Alex headed out to the dock with his fishing pole. Then I cornered Linda in the kitchen. "Enough is enough," I said, my voice firm. "I'm done with the games, Linda. You need to tell me what's going on." She turned to me, her face a perfect mask of exasperation. "There's nothing going on," she said sharply. "Jason was drunk, and you're letting his nonsense get into your head." "Don't do that," I said, stepping closer. "Don't dismiss this like it's nothing. He didn't just pull those words out of thin air. He was talking about you, wasn't he?" Her eyes flickered, just for a second, but it was enough. Enough to confirm that she was hiding something. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to keep my voice steady. "Is there something I need to know about me and Alex?" I asked, my heart pounding as the question left my lips. Her expression turned cold, almost defiant. "How dare you even suggest something like that?" She hissed. "After everything we've been through, you have the nerve to question your own children. Don't twist this around," I snapped. "I've been in the dark long enough, Linda. If there's something you're not telling me, I'll find out one way or another." For a moment, she said nothing, her jaw tight and her eyes blazing. Then she turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, leaving me standing there with more questions than ever. I didn't wait for Jason to come to me. I found him sitting on the back porch, staring out at the lake with a mug of coffee in his hands. He looked tired. The kind of tired that wasn't just from lack of sleep, but from carrying something heavy for too long. "You've got 5 minutes to stop being cryptic and start telling me the truth," I said, sitting down next to him. Jason didn't look at me. Instead, he took a slow sip of his coffee and exhaled deeply. "I tried to keep my mouth shut," he said finally. "I really did. But last night seeing you sitting there, smiling like everything was fine, it just got to me." "Why, Jason?" I pressed. "What's so bad that you felt the need to blow everything up in the middle of dinner?" He looked at me then, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. Pity, anger, maybe both. "Because you deserve to know," he said simply. "Even if it destroys you." I felt the air leave my lungs. "Know what?" He hesitated, his fingers tightening around the mug. "I can't be the one to tell you," he said finally. "It's not my place." "Jason, for God's sake. Ask Mom." He interrupted, his voice hard. "Ask her why Mia and Alex look nothing like you. Ask her why she's been so defensive every time someone brings up family resemblance. Ask her why she's been lying to you for years." My world tilted. I opened my mouth to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but the words wouldn't come. Deep down, I knew. I'd seen the small differences. The way Maya's sharp cheekbones didn't match mine, the way Alex's eyes were a shade of green no one in my family had. I'd always brushed it off, telling myself that genetics were strange, unpredictable. But now, hearing Jason put it into words, the doubts I'd buried for years came flooding back. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jason's expression softened, and he reached out to squeeze my shoulder. I wouldn't have said anything if I wasn't. I sat there for a long time after he left, staring out at the lake as the pieces of my life began to shift and crumble. My perfect family reunion had become something else entirely, a mirror held up to all the things I'd been too blind, or too afraid, to see. I didn't know what my next move would be, but one thing was clear: I needed proof. Proof that would either confirm my worst fears or put them to rest. Proof that could change everything, and I knew exactly how to get it. The idea of a DNA test wasn't just a thought. It was a necessity. Jason's words had planted a seed of doubt that was growing like a weed, strangling every ounce of certainty I had left. But I couldn't act rashly. If Linda caught wind of what I was planning, she'd find a way to derail it, and if my suspicions were wrong, I couldn't think about that. I had to know the truth. I spent the rest of the morning watching, observing. Linda moved through the day like nothing was wrong, but I could see it now. The tightness in her jaw. The way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes when she spoke to me. She wasn't as composed as she thought she was. Mia and Alex were harder to read. They seemed genuinely unaware of the tension that had taken root in the family. Mia was her usual bright, talkative self, while Alex was quieter, more introspective. Still, there was something about them that I couldn't unsee now. The way they interacted with Linda, almost like a team, instinctively turning to her for reassurance in a way they didn't with me. It wasn't overt, but it was there. That evening, while Linda was out taking walk to clear her head, I made my move. I called Jason to the living room and explained my plan. "You sure about this?" he asked, crossing his arms as he leaned against the doorway. His voice was steady, but his expression betrayed a flicker of unease. "I don't have a choice," I said. "I can't keep living with this doubt hanging over me. I need proof." Jason hesitated, then nodded. "I'll help you." We worked quickly, gathering what we needed without drawing attention. Jason distracted Mia and Alex in the backyard, getting them to help him with some made-up core while I retrieved the items for the DNA samples, a hairbrush from Mia's room, a used toothbrush from Alex's bathroom. I handled everything carefully, making sure not to contaminate the samples, all while my hands shook with the enormity of what I was doing. By the time Linda came back, the samples were safely packed away, and Jason and I had returned to our usual spots in the house. She glanced at me as she walked past, her eyes narrowing slightly, but she didn't say anything. The next few days were unbearable. I sent the samples off to a private lab, paying extra for expedited results. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leapt into my throat, only to crash back down when it was just another spam call or work email. Linda grew more irritable as the days went on, snapping at small things and withdrawing into herself. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided being alone with me. It was as if she knew the walls were closing in. Jason stayed close, a quiet presence that I hadn't fully appreciated before. He didn't press me for updates or try to talk me out of what I was doing. He just stayed, as though he knew I'd need him when the results came in. The call came late in the afternoon, 3 days after I sent the samples. I was in my office when my phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a number I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I picked it up. "Mr. Carter." A calm, professional voice asked. "Yes, this is it," my throat dry. "This is Dr. Evans from the DNA testing lab. I have your results ready. Do you have a moment to go over them?" I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I'm ready." She began speaking, her tone neutral and clinical, but the words didn't register at first. I heard phrases like confirmed match and biological relationship, but it wasn't until she said the next part that my world truly shattered. However, the DNA analysis indicates that you are not the biological father of the individuals tested." The words hung in the air, a punch to the gut that knocked the wind out of me. I barely heard the rest of what she said, something about a possible close male relative, before I ended the call. My hand was shaking so badly that I nearly dropped the phone. "Not the father." The phrase repeated in my mind over and over, like a broken record. Mia and Alex, my twins, my children weren't mine. The air felt heavy, suffocating. My vision blurred as I tried to make sense of what I'd just heard. All the years I'd spent raising them, and loving them, sacrificing for them, it was all built on a lie. And then it hit me. A close male relative. Jason's words from days ago echoed in my mind. "Ask Mom." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Linda. She had answers, and she wasn't going to get away with this. Not anymore. I found Linda in the living room, sipping her second, or was it third, glass of wine, her eyes fixed on the TV, though it was clear she wasn't paying attention. The room was dim, the glow of the screen flickering over her face. She didn't even look up as I walked in, but I knew she could sense me there. "Turn it off," I said, my voice cold flat. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "What's wrong now?" "Turn it off," I repeated, this time with enough force to make her sigh dramatically before picking up the remote and silencing the noise. I stood there for a moment, my fists clenched, my chest heaving as I struggled to keep control. The rage bubbling inside me was like nothing I'd ever felt before. She was sitting there so calmly, so unaffected, while my entire world had just been ripped apart. "I got a call today," I said finally, my voice low but steady. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, fear. "A call?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but her voice betrayed her. From who? From the lab, I said, stepping closer. The one I sent the DNA samples to. Her face went pale, and the glass in her hand trembled slightly. She set it down on the coffee table, her movements slow and deliberate, like she was trying to buy time. You did a DNA test?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did," I said, my eyes never leaving hers. "And you know what they told me? They told me Mia and Alex aren't mine." She flinched, her mask of composure cracking just slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, shaking her head. "That's ridiculous. Stop lying." I snapped, my voice echoing through the room. She flinched again, but I didn't care. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Jason was right, wasn't he? There's something you've been hiding from me this entire time. And now I know what it is." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're being insane," she said, her voice rising to match mine. "How could you even do something like that without talking to me first? You're going to destroy this family over some stupid test." "Destroy this family?" I laughed bitterly. "You already did that the moment you decided to lie to me. Now tell me the truth, Linda. Who is their father?" Her mouth opened, then closed again, as though she was trying to form an answer but couldn't find the words. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating, until finally she spoke. "It doesn't matter," she said, her voice trembling. "You're their father, the only father they've ever known. Don't you dare try to spin this," I shouted, my anger boiling over. "I've given everything for this family, everything for a lie, for someone else's kids. Who is he, Linda? Who the hell is their father?" Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't soften me. If anything, they only fueled my anger. She had no right to cry, not after what she'd done. "It was a mistake," she said finally, her voice breaking. "It was so long ago. It didn't mean anything." "That's not an answer," I yelled. "Tell me who he is." Her silence told me everything. I took a step back, my mind racing through every possibility, every man who could have been close enough to betray me like this. And then, like a thunderclap, it hit me. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "It can't be." She didn't respond, but the look on her face confirmed it. My stomach turned as the realization settled over me, heavy and suffocating. "It was my cousin, wasn't it?" I said, my voice barely audible. "Mark." She let out a choked sob, covering her face with her hands. And that was all the confirmation I needed. My knees felt weak, and I had to grip the back of the chair to keep from collapsing. Mark. My cousin. The man I'd grown up with, trusted like a brother. The man I'd welcomed into my home countless times, who had played with my kids and laughed at my table. He was their father. "You disgust me," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "Both of you? Please," Linda begged, stepping toward me. "It wasn't what you think." "Don't," I said, holding up a hand to stop her. "Don't come near me. Don't say another word. You've done enough." I turned and walked out, her sobs echoing behind me as I made my way to the front door. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. I stumbled out onto the porch, the cool evening air hitting me like a slap to the face. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow as I tried to process what had just unfolded. Mark. Of all people, it had to be him. The betrayal wasn't just Linda's. It was his too. The man I'd trusted with everything had stabbed me in the back in the most unforgivable way. Jason stepped out from the shadows, his face pale in the dim light. "I heard everything," he said, his voice low and filled with something I couldn't place. Anger, sadness, maybe both. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My thoughts were a jumbled mess spiraling out of control. Dad. Jason's voice was firmer now, pulling me out of my haze. "What are you going to do?" I turned to him, my hands trembling. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice cracking. "I don't know how to move forward from this." Jason nodded, his jaw tightening. "We can't let them get away with it," he said, his tone dark. "Mom, Mark, they've been lying to you, to all of us, for years. They don't deserve to just walk away like nothing happened." His words struck a chord. He was right. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd built, being torn apart by two people who didn't care about the damage they caused. "I need to confront Mark," I said, the decision settling in my chest like a weight. He owes me answers. Jason's expression hardened. You're not doing it alone, he said. I'm coming with you. No, I said, shaking my head. This isn't your fight. Like hell it isn't, Jason snapped. Thee lied to me too. Mia and Alex are my siblings, and now I find out they're what? My cousins. Do you have any idea how screwed up that is? His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't even thought about how this would affect him. Jason had always been the protective older brother, the one who stepped in when the twins needed guidance or support. This revelation would shatter that foundation. Fine, I said, relenting. But if you're coming, you need to follow my lead. This is going to get ugly. Jason nodded, and we headed to the car. The drive to Mark's house was silent, the air between us heavy with unspoken tension. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Mark lived about 20 minutes away, in a cozy suburban house that now felt tainted. When we pulled into the driveway, I could see the faint glow of lights inside. He was home. I didn't bother knocking. I pounded on the door with enough force to rattle it in its frame. Jason stood behind me, his presence a steadying force even as my rage threatened to consume me. After a moment, the door opened and there he was. Mark. He looked surprised at first, but as his eyes flicked between me and Jason, his expression shifted to something closer to dread. He said, his voice cautious. What's going on? You tell me, I said, my voice cold. How long have you been sleeping with my wife? Mark's face went pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, I roared, stepping closer. I know, Mark. I know about Mia and Alex. I know they're your kids. Mark stumbled back, his hand gripping the doorframe for support. Listen, I can explain. I interrupted, my voice shaking with fury. Explain how you betrayed me. How you sat at my table, played with my kids, and pretended to be my friend while you were stabbing me in the back. Jason stepped forward, his fists clenched. You're disgusting, he said, his voice low and filled with venom. Do you have any idea what you've done to our family? Mark looked between us, his face a mix of guilt and panic. It wasn't supposed to happen, he said weakly. It was one-time mistake. Don't you dare call it a mistake, I said, my voice deadly quiet. Mistakes don't last for years. Mistakes don't create children. Mark's shoulders sagged, and for a moment, he looked like he might collapse under the weight of his guilt. I never meant to hurt you, he said, his voice barely audible. But you did, I said, my voice steady now. You hurt me, you hurt my family, and you don't get to walk away from this without consequences. Mark's eyes darted to Jason, who was glaring at him with pure hatred. Please, Mark said, his voice breaking. Don't tell Maya and Alex. They don't deserve to know. Don't you dare tell me what my kids deserve, I said, my anger flaring again. You lost the right to have a say in their lives the moment you decided to betray me. Mark opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. I turned and walked back to the car, Jason following close behind. The confrontation had given me some of the answers I needed, but it wasn't enough. The storm wasn't over, not yet. The drive back from Mark's house was suffocating. Jason sat in the passenger seat. His arms crossed and his jaw clenched so tight I thought it might shatter. I could feel his anger radiating off him, and it mirrored my own. The confrontation had answered the who, but the why still hung over me like a storm cloud. Why would Linda betray me with him? Why would Mark, of all people, cross that line? I parked the car in our driveway but didn't move. Jason finally broke the silence, his voice low and bitter. What now? He asked. I stared out at the house, the lights glowing warmly in the windows like a cruel joke. No, we deal with your mother. Jason exhaled sharply, shaking his head. You think she's going to tell the truth now. After everything, she'll lie again. She always does. Not this time, I said, my voice hard. She doesn't get the chance. I stepped out of the car and headed for the front door. Jason followed, his footsteps heavy behind me. Inside, the house was quiet. The faint sound of the twins' voices drifting from upstairs. Linda was in the kitchen, sipping wine again, her face pale and drawn. She looked up when we entered, and her expression froze when she saw us. You went to see him, didn't you? She asked, her voice trembling. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked right up to her, stopping just short of her space. How long? I asked, my voice cold as ice. Her eyes darted to Jason, then back to me. How long what? Don't play dumb. Linda, how long were you and Mark sneaking around behind my back? Was it just once? Or was it every time I turned my back? She set her glass down with trembling hands. It wasn't like that, she stammered. Then what was it like? Jason snapped, stepping closer. Because from where we're standing, it looks like you've been lying to us for our entire lives. Linda's gaze flickered between us, her defenses crumbling under the weight of the confrontation. It was one time, she said finally, her voice barely audible. I told you, it was a mistake. A mistake that lasted how long? I pressed. 9 months. 18 years. How do you even say that with a straight face? Her lip trembled, but she didn't respond. She couldn't. The guilt was written all over her face. Jason's voice rose, his anger spilling over. Do Mia and Alex know? Did you ever tell them? Or have you been letting them live this lie? Linda's head snapped up, her eyes wide. No, she said quickly. They don't know, and they don't need to. They see you as their father. You are their father. Don't, I said, my voice shaking with fury. Don't try to twist this into something noble. You didn't do this for me. You did it for yourself. You lied because it was easier for you. Because you didn't want to face the consequences. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't let up. Do you have any idea what you've done? Not just to me, but to this family, to Jason. You've destroyed everything we built. Linda's tears spilled over, but Jason wasn't moved. You don't get to cry, he said, his voice hard. You don't get to act like the victim. Please, Linda begged, reaching out to me. I never meant for this to happen. I was scared, and I didn't know what to do. Stop, I said, stepping back. I've heard enough. Her hand dropped to her side, and for a moment, the three of us stood there in silence, the weight of the truth pressing down on us. Finally, I turned to Jason. Go check on your siblings, I said, my voice quieter now. Make sure they don't hear any of this. Jason hesitated, his eyes searching mine, but eventually nodded. He left the room, his footsteps heavy as he climbed the stairs. When he was gone, I turned back to Linda. This doesn't end here, I said, my voice low and steady. You and Mark don't get to walk away from this like it's nothing. You've lied to me, to Jason, to Mia and Alex. And I will make sure everyone knows the truth. Her face crumpled, but I didn't care. I'd spent years sacrificing for this family, pouring my blood, sweat, and tears into a life I thought was built on love and trust. And now, I was standing in the ruins of it, staring at the woman who had set it all on fire. You don't deserve this family, I said, my voice cold. And I'll make damn sure you don't get to keep it. I turned and left the room, leaving her sobbing quietly behind me. Upstairs, Jason was standing in the hallway, his face a mix of anger and pain. What did she say? He asked. Enough, I said. She said enough. But as I looked at him, I knew this wasn't the end. Not even close. This was only the beginning of what would come next. The next morning, the house felt different, quieter, heavier. Jason had stayed up late with Mia and Alex, keeping them distracted and oblivious to the chaos that was unfolding beneath the surface. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Linda's face, heard Mark's pathetic excuses, and felt the weight of betrayal crushing me all over again. Linda wasn't in the kitchen when I came down, which wasn't surprising. She was probably hiding in the bedroom, trying to figure out her next move. Jason was already at the table, sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone. He looked up when I walked in, his expression guarded. Morning, he said. I nodded, pouring myself a cup of coffee. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged. We were both waiting for the next step, the next blow to fall. We can't keep this from them forever, Jason said after a moment, his voice low. Mia and Alex, they deserve to know the truth. I clenched my jaw, staring down at the coffee swirling in my mug. I know, I said finally, but not yet. Not like this. Jason frowned but didn't argue. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers against the table. So, what's the plan? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think clearly. First, I need to make sure they're safe. When they find out, it's going to change everything. They'll need support. We need to be ready for that. Jason nodded slowly, his expression hardening. And Mark. A flash of anger surged through me at the mention of his name. Mark's not walking away from this, I said. Not after what he's done. He's going to face the consequences. Both of them are. Jason's eyes darkened, and for a moment I saw a side of him I didn't recognize. A fierce protective anger that matched my own. Good, he said simply. That afternoon, Linda emerged from the bedroom, her face pale and drawn. She avoided my gaze as she moved around the house, her usual confidence replaced by a nervous energy that only fueled my resentment. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. Not until I figured out how to confront Mia and Alex without destroying them in the process. But Linda wasn't going to make it easy. She cornered me in the hallway, her voice low and urgent. We need to talk, she said. I didn't stop walking. There's nothing to talk about. Ah, please, she said, grabbing my arm. Don't tell them. Don't tell the twins. They don't need to know. I turned to her, my eyes narrowing. And what do you suggest, Linda? That we keep lying to them. Keep pretending everything's fine while you and Mark get away with it. Her face crumpled, but I didn't let up. They're not stupid. Linda, they'll figure it out eventually, and when they do, it's going to hurt even more because they'll know we lied. I am begging you, she said, tears streaming down her face. I'll do anything. But please don't destroy this family. This family was already destroyed, I said coldly. The moment you decided to betray me. I pulled away from her and walked outside, needing space before the anger swallowed me whole. By the evening, I had a plan. I called Jason into the living room and laid it out for him. We tell them tomorrow, I said. Both of them, together. No more lies. Jason nodded, his expression grim. And after that, I hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. After that, we figure out what's next. But first, they need to know the truth. Jason didn't argue. He just nodded, his jaw tightening as he stared out the window. Neither of us noticed Mia standing in the hallway, her eyes wide and her face pale as she listened to every word. The next morning, everything unraveled. Maya's voice cut through the house like a blade. What's going on? She demanded, standing in the living room with Alex close behind her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. She clutched her phone tightly in one hand, and I could see her fingers trembling. Jason and I were caught off guard. We had been sitting at the dining table, going over how we'd break the news, but Mia's tone told me the time for planning was over. She had heard enough to know something was wrong, and she wasn't going to let us keep her in the dark. What are you talking about, sweetheart? I asked, trying to sound calm, but my voice wavered. Don't lie to me, Dad, she snapped, tears welling up in her eyes. I heard you last night, you and Jason. Something about the truth, about lies. And Mom, she choked on her words. What's happening to our family? Alex stepped forward, his usual calm demeanor replaced by an uncharacteristic urgency. Yeah, what's going on? He asked. You've all been acting weird for days. We're not stupid, Dad. Just tell us. Linda appeared in the doorway, her face drained of color. She said, her voice shaking. This isn't the time. Mia whirled on her. No, Mom. If this is about you, then I want to know. What's going on? Jason stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. They deserve to know, he said, his voice hard as he turned to me. We can't keep this from them any longer. Linda looked at me, pleading silently, but I ignored her. I couldn't protect her anymore. Not when the truth was clawing its way to the surface. I took a deep breath and turned to me and Alex. There's something you need to know, I said, my voice steady but heavy with emotion. Something that's going to change everything. Amaya's hand flew to her mouth, and Alex frowned deeply, his confusion turning to dread. It's about your mother, I continued, glancing at Linda, who was trembling. And it's about Mark. Mark, Alex repeated, his voice rising. What does Uncle Mark have to do with this? Linda stepped forward, her voice breaking. Please, she begged, looking at me. Don't do this. Stop trying to control this. I snapped at her, my patience gone. Thee deserved to know the truth. Maya's voice was barely a whisper. What truth? I looked directly at her, then at Alex. Mark isn't just your uncle. He's your biological father. The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just detonated. Mia stumbled back, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. Alex's jaw dropped, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "No," Mia whispered, shaking her head. "No, that's not true. That can't be true." "I'm sorry," I said, my voice breaking. "I didn't know. I only found out a few days ago." Jason stepped forward, placing a hand on Mia's shoulder, but she pulled away, staring at Linda with pure betrayal in her eyes. "Mom," she demanded. "Tell me he's lying. Tell me it's not true." Linda sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "I'm sorry," she cried. "I'm so sorry." Alex's voice erupted like thunder. "You lied to us. You lied to Dad. How could you do this?" "It was a mistake," Linda sobbed, her voice desperate. "I never wanted this to happen." A mistake." Jason cut her off, his voice sharp with anger. "You call lying to all of us for our entire lives a mistake. You're unbelievable." Maya turned to me, her tears streaming freely. "Dad," she whispered. Are we still your kids?" The question broke something inside me, but I stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You my daughter," I said firmly, looking at both of them. "And you're my son. That will never change. I raised you. I love you. Nothing about this changes that." Mia collapsed into my arms, sobbing, while Alex stood rigid, staring at Linda as if she were a stranger. Jason stayed silent, his anger simmering just below the surface. Linda tried to approach, but Alex stepped between her and Maya. "Don't," he said coldly. "Don't come near us." Her face crumpled, but Alex didn't budge. The room was filled with the sound of Maya's quiet sobs and Linda's desperate apologies. But no one was listening to her anymore. The family I had sacrificed everything for was broken, and there was no putting it back together. The house was silent in the hours that followed. Mia had locked herself in her room, her sobs muffled behind the door. Alex stormed out, muttering something about needing air, and Jason stayed in the living room, his jaw tight and his eyes dark. Linda was nowhere to be found. She'd disappeared into the bedroom, leaving the rest of us to deal with the fallout she'd caused. I sat alone in the dining room, staring at the family photos on the wall, images of birthdays, holidays, milestones, moments that now felt tainted. They weren't just pictures anymore. They were proof of how much I'd been blind to, how much I'd sacrificed for a life built on lies. My mind raced as I tried to piece together what came next. The DNA test had confirmed the worst. Mark wasn't just a betrayer. He was the man who'd stolen what should have been mine, my children, my legacy. But Mia's question lingered in my mind, "Are we still your kids?" That was the part that cut the deepest. Because no matter what the test said, I was their father. I'd been there for every scraped knee, every school play, every triumph and heartbreak. That couldn't be erased by biology. I heard the front door creak open and looked up to see Alex walking back inside. His face was calmer now, but his eyes carried a weight I hadn't seen before. He sat across from me at the table, folding his hands in front of him. "Dad," he said quietly, "what happens now?" I exhaled slowly, the enormity of the question pressing down on me. "We move forward," I said. "One way or another." Alex nodded, his jaw tightening. "I don't want anything to do with her," he said, his voice cold. "Or Mark. I can't look at them the same way." I didn't argue. He had every right to feel that way. "It's your choice," I said. "I won't force you to forgive them. But I want you to know that whatever happens, I'm still here for you, both of you." Alex's eyes softened slightly, and he nodded. "I know," he said. Jason walked in then, his expression unreadable as he leaned against the doorframe. "Maya's asking for you," he said. I stood, my body feeling heavier than it had in years, and made my way upstairs. I knocked softly on Mia's door, and after a moment, she opened it, her face red and tear-streaked. "Can we talk?" I asked. She nodded and stepped aside, letting me in. I sat on the edge of her bed while she curled up in the corner, hugging a pillow to her chest. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm sorry you had to find out like this. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from it." "It's not your fault," she whispered, her voice shaky. "You didn't do anything wrong. But it still hurts," I said. "And that's what I'm sorry for. I never wanted this for you. For either of you." She sniffled, wiping her eyes. Are we going to be okay?" I reached out, taking her hand in mine. "We're going to be okay," I said firmly. "It's going to take time, but we'll get through this. Together." Amia nodded, her grip tightening on my hand. That night, I sat on the back porch with Jason. The air was cool, the stars scattered across the sky like distant promises. He handed me a beer, and we sat in silence for a while, the weight of the day settling over us. You know, Jason said finally, his voice low. You don't have to fix everything right now. It's okay to just take a breath. I nodded, staring out at the dark expanse of the yard. It doesn't feel okay, I admitted. Will, he said. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week. But it will. I turned to look at him, seeing the man he was becoming, the strength, the resilience. Thank you, I said, for standing by me through this. He shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. That's what family does, right? I thought about that word, family. It wasn't about blood or biology. It was about the bonds we built, the love we gave, the sacrifices we made for each other. Linda and Mark had tried to shatter that, but they hadn't succeeded. As I sat there with Jason, I realized something important. I didn't need revenge to feel whole. I didn't need to destroy Linda or Mark to reclaim what mattered most. My family wasn't gone, it was just different now, and I could live with that.
The steak was still bleeding on the plate when she said it. We weren't fighting. We weren't even talking. Just chewing in sync like some god-awful metronome of a dying marriage. The kind of silence that's not peaceful, it's surgical. Cold. Clinical. Like two strangers waiting for test results they already know are bad. Then, mid-chew, she pushed her plate an inch forward, just enough to make the silverware clatter, and stood up so quickly her chair screeched against the tile. That sound alone was violent. It sliced the air like she'd been rehearsing it in her head for weeks. Maybe months. I've had enough. No context. No wind-up. Just that. I remember how the gravy on her potatoes had congealed. How the ice in my glass had melted into a lukewarm puddle around the bourbon I hadn't touched. I set my fork down carefully, like it was made of glass. Looked up. Her lipstick was perfect. Not a smudge. I remember thinking, she dressed up to destroy something. And then I said it. Finally. One word. No sarcasm. No volume. Just release. She blinked, thrown. Like I'd stolen the punchline of a joke she thought only she knew. Then she scoffed, cocked her hip like a lawyer mid-cross-examination, and said the line she'd probably been saving like ammunition. I'm not asking. I'm telling you I'm done. I found someone who sees me. There it was. Sees me. The line from every cheap affair novel with the torn bodice on the cover. She wanted me to beg, rage, cry, do something that would make her feel like she still mattered to me in some twisted way. But I didn't. I just nodded once and stood up slowly, brushing non-existent crumbs from my pants like I was done with a meeting. Then I said, I'll load the dishwasher. I didn't ask who he was. I already knew it wasn't a stranger. Jade was methodical, calculated. She'd test the water before she ever jumped. She stared at me like she was waiting for the rest. Maybe an insult, a tearful plea, even a cruel jab. But there was nothing. Not because I was numb, but because I'd already been grieving this marriage in secret for years, quietly, like a man watching his favorite bookstore turn into a vape shop. As I loaded the plates, she stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked out, heels tapping like gunfire across the hardwood. I remember the sound of the front door. Not the slam. The click. Intentional. Final. I stood at the sink, watching the water run over the plates, and realized something odd. The smell of her perfume still hung in the air, but it was already starting to fade. Just like her. And still, I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt the first flicker of something else. Freedom? No. Calculation. She thought she had just ended the story, but all she did was start mine. She was gone by Friday. Not a word to her parents. Not a call to her daughter. She just vanished from the house like it had been a hotel room she'd overstayed. The only proof she'd ever lived there was the faint perfume residue on the curtains and the 3 empty hangers spinning in the closet like some Hitchcockian afterthought. She didn't leave a note. She left a Spotify playlist, new chapter, new me. I found it accidentally when her old iPad auto-synced in the kitchen. First track? Girl on Fire. You'd think it was a teenager's breakup, not the slow disintegration of a 22-year marriage. By Monday, she'd updated her address on our joint credit card account. I got the notification while stirring sugar into my coffee. She'd moved in with him. Zeke. 37. Personal trainer. Drove a Dodge Charger he couldn't afford and wore compression shirts like they were a second skin. I'd seen him in the building before, tall, shiny, smug. The kind of guy who uses words like alpha and refers to himself in the third person when drunk. He worked 2 floors down from her. It was probably accidental the first time: coffee run, elevator chat, protein shake advice. Then came gym nights. Then networking mixers. Then hotel receipts for corporate retreats in nearby towns with no conference centers. She thought she was subtle. She wasn't. You don't start wearing silk lingerie on business trips for the networking. You don't suddenly care about squats and spin class when you used to call yoga cult stretching. And most of all, you don't text your husband, working late. Don't wait up red heart from a Marriott at 11:47 p.m. with a wine glass in the frame. Not unless you're sure he's too old, too slow, too checked out to notice. Jade told her friends I was sweet but stagnant. Said I was like an end table, reliable, decorative, and completely inanimate. She wanted fire. Zeke was fire. Funny how she forgot fire burns down everything it touches. I didn't call her. Didn't rage text. Didn't even delete the Spotify playlist. I left it there, song by song, like evidence in a trial she didn't know she was on trial for yet. Instead, I went upstairs, poured a scotch, and took out the business card I'd been holding on to for 3 years. Back when I'd helped a buddy get through a vicious divorce. The lawyer had said, if you ever need to protect your future, call me. Quietly. So I did. Next morning, 8:03 a.m., I was in a dark oak office across from a woman who wore Navy-like armor and smiled like a chess player 3 moves from checkmate. She listened, took notes, asked 2 questions. Are you sure this is the path you want to take? And how quiet do you want to be? I said, silent, until the end. She nodded. And just like that, the counterattack began. No arguments. No pleading. No last-ditch marriage counseling funded by guilt. Jade thought she'd taken the wheel and floored it. But she didn't realize I'd already mapped the exits and greased the brakes. She wanted a reaction. That much was obvious. Within days of moving in with Zeke, Jade's social media turned into a digital cologne ad, sweaty selfies with filtered sunsets, captions like she was narrating a midlife rebrand. Sometimes peace starts with burning the old script. New chapter, new fire. There was even a boomerang of her clinking glasses with Zeke, some rooftop bar downtown, with the quote, "Choose passion over predictability." I didn't comment. Didn't even block her. I watched. Quietly. The way a hunter watches the animal walk right into the trap it thinks it's outsmarted. My name was still on the deed. Still on the accounts. Still on everything that actually mattered. And she was out there celebrating like she'd won a custody battle against boredom itself. So while she posed with martinis and posted about her inner goddess awakening, I did the most radical thing imaginable for a man in my shoes. I disappeared strategically. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I gave no tearful monologues to friends. No whiskey-soaked barstool therapy sessions. Just smiles. Calm, polite, even cheerful. You see, people underestimate silence. Silence is unnerving. It's a vacuum that makes liars talk too much and betrayers second-guess themselves. Jade had counted on fury. Instead, she got nothing. That nothing haunted her. I listed the house the next week. Not on Zillow like a desperate man purging his past. No, I handed it over to a private agent. A quiet deal. All cash. Gone in days. I moved into a furnished apartment for the time being. Nothing fancy, just a base of operations. Minimal. Controlled. Peaceful. When the divorce papers came, I didn't fight. No alimony squabble. No demands. Just a signature and a nod. She walked away with what looked like a victory. She even texted me after. Jade, thanks for not making it harder than it had to be. I think this is best for both of us. You deserve someone who sees you too. I read it, stared at the blinking cursor like it was gasping for a response. And then I didn't type a single word. She would take that silence however she wanted. Guilt? Closure? Maybe she'd convince herself I was crushed. That she'd spare me somehow. What she didn't know, and would never suspect, was that I'd already moved my retirement portfolio into a limited trust. That the cabin in Vermont she always considered just a dusty asset had been quietly refinanced into a shell company 2 months before she walked out. that the seemingly joint savings had been split long ago into two pipelines, one that trickled into the account she saw, and one that flowed somewhere she never would. Let her think she'd torched the old script. Let her celebrate the bonfire. I'd written a new script already, and the final act? She wouldn't be in it, but she'd sure as hell feel it. She thought she'd taken half. That's the part that still makes me chuckle. When I'm sipping coffee on the deck of a cabin she thought was a waste of weekend gas, or when I open the app that tracks the rental property she never knew existed because real estate bores me. Jade walked out thinking she'd split the pie. In reality, I let her leave with a crust and a smile. It started months before her big "I've had enough" performance. Not because I suspected an affair, though the signs were there, but because I'd been married long enough to know when someone starts measuring the drapes in someone else's life. She stopped asking about money, and that was the biggest red flag. Jade always had a sixth sense for numbers. Not in a savvy way, more in a "what's mine is mine, and what's yours should also be mine" kind of way. She asked about joint savings like she was checking the weather, casually, in passing. She never touched the retirement paperwork again. She stopped pretending to care about the Vermont cabin. The shift was subtle, but to me, it was seismic. So I played dumb and started moving. The limited trust was the first domino. You'd be amazed how fast a good estate lawyer can restructure your financial DNA when you show up with a calm voice and decades of quiet discipline. Retirement accounts? Locked and shielded. The rentals in her name? Not anymore. Transferred clean and quiet into a trust held by a nonprofit shell I'd co-founded with my goddaughter Danielle 3 years ago. A mentorship initiative, if anyone bothered to ask. The cabin? That dusty little A-frame we bought for leaf peeping back in 2009? Retitled, refinanced, and removed from the marital asset list with the precision of a surgeon. I even sold off one of our older rental units on paper at a minor loss to myself. Through a holding company. She wouldn't have recognized the paperwork if it danced naked in front of her holding a "You've Been Played" banner. By the time Jade filed, all that was left was the primary checking account, the house, which I'd already liquidated, and her leased SUV. She walked out of that final meeting thinking she'd kept things fair. That's what she told her sister. That's what she posted in one of those faux humble Instagram captions next to a selfie of her sipping white wine in athleisure. We handled it like adults. Mutual respect and fresh starts. Sparkles. Mutual respect? Please. I respected her enough not to humiliate her publicly. But privately, I dismantled the scaffolding of everything she assumed she'd inherit. She got half of the primary account because I let it sit fat and untouched for months. She got the car because she fought for it like it was a trophy. And she got the most dangerous thing you can ever hand someone like Jade. The illusion of victory. She thought she'd leveled up, but really, she just exited the game while I kept the board, the bank, and the rules. And once the dust settled, I started building. Something quiet. Something clean. Something that didn't carry the stink of someone else's compromises. She thought she left a man behind in pieces, but all she really did was free up space for the next version of me. And that version didn't play fair. He played smart. The irony? I think she really believed I'd just fade, like a smudge on her rearview mirror. 1 month after she left, I was supposed to be the image of decay, hunched over, nursing scotch for breakfast, still sleeping on our side of the bed. That's the version of me she wanted to exist. The noble, tragic ex who mourns in silence while she does yoga on a rooftop and tells her new circle, "I hope he finds peace." But grief wasn't what I felt. Clarity? Yes. Energy? Absolutely. And something else, something surgical, cold, productive. I didn't rebuild out of spite. I rebuilt because I had finally been given permission to evolve. Her departure wasn't abandonment. It was clearance. A full demolition permit, signed and stamped. So I got to work. First, I bought a home. Not a giant flex, not some ridiculous bachelor pad with LED lights and marble countertops. No, I found a 2-bedroom on a quiet hill just outside New Hope, quaint town, killer bookstore, real neighbors. The kind of place where people knock when they bring you pie, not lawsuits. It had an office with sunlit windows and a garden that didn't beg for perfection. It wasn't a fortress. It was a beginning. Then I handed over the reins to someone I actually trusted. Danielle. My goddaughter, 28, MBA, Absolute shark in heels with a heart like polished steel. Jade always underestimated her, called her cute, like that wasn't the most condescending adjective in existence. Danielle had been quietly managing more and more of my side business, consulting for mid-sized logistics companies, while Jade rolled her eyes at every mention of it. She's sweet, Tom, but she still says, like, in meetings. Yeah, well, that sweet girl renegotiated a 5-year contract I'd been stuck in for a decade. And when I told her I wanted out, wanted peace, wanted her to run things full-time, she didn't hesitate. You finally dumping the anchor? She asked. Then added with a grin, about damn time, second dad. Danielle didn't want my sympathy. She wanted the keys, and I gave them to her. But the last move? That one was personal. I reached out to someone Jade wouldn't just not expect. She wouldn't believe it if she heard it whispered through 10 people and an anonymous letter. It took one phone call. Not long. 10 minutes, maybe less. I remember exactly what I said after the small talk. I think it's time we caught up. I have a story for you. And a proposition. The voice on the other end paused. Just a beat. Then, send me a time and place. That was all it took. Jade thought I was sulking in the ruins. But I wasn't in ruins. I was in blueprints. She saw a man in his 60s and assumed the clock was winding down. What she missed was this. Men like me? We don't fade. We shed. We upgrade. We go underground, not to die, but to reinforce. And when we come back up, we don't need to knock. We own the damn door. She thought she was starting her new life. Turns out, it was just a layover on someone else's layaway plan. The apartment she moved into with Zeke was one of those high-rise, boxy places with quartz counters and fake modern charm, or rented, not owned, of course. Zeke said buying was a scam by the banks, which was his way of saying I have debt, bad credit, and a phobia of adult decisions. Jade moved in thinking it was temporary. Exciting. Like crashing at a lover's den between chapters. But 2 weeks in, the smell of protein powder and Axe body spray no longer screamed passion. It screamed sweaty man-child with delusions of crypto grandeur. Zeke didn't cook, didn't clean, didn't even pretend to look for a place together like she'd fantasized. He just kept his gym schedule, posted shirtless selfies with corny captions like hustle excuses, and played Xbox at full volume while she tried to work remote meetings in the next room. And when she asked about long-term plans, he blinked like she'd spoken in Morse code. Plans? Chill, we're just vibing. But Jade doesn't vibe. She schedules, calculates, curates. Her fantasy was passion, sure, but her actual need was structure. Zeke? Zeke was a walking chaos app with good teeth and 2 pairs of shoes, both white and both filthy. Then came the messages. She found them one night when he fell asleep on the couch mid-bench press-bragging YouTube rabbit hole. His phone buzzed. The screen lit up. She reached for it, not to snoop, she'd tell herself later, just to silence it. Curiosity is a hell of a drug. The chat was with a woman named Molly G. Cherries. 2 scrolls in. She's got money and regrets. That's all I need. Bro, she left her old dude for me rolling on the floor laughing talk about free ride. Honestly, not even fun anymore. But she pays for takeout, so whatever. Jade stared at the screen like it was written in flames. This wasn't a mistake. It was a manifesto. She confronted him the next morning, while he flexed in the mirror and complained about his macros. She held the phone up like a badge. He looked at the messages, blinked once, then laughed. A low, actual laugh. The kind that feels like spit in your face. You left your husband for this, he said, arms folded, biceps tense like that somehow made the insult sting less. You're not even fun anymore. At least back then, you were a good secret. A secret. That's all she ever was to him. An affair. A thrill. Something exciting to whisper about in locker rooms, not someone to build with. He went back to his shake like it was over. Jade didn't cry. Not right away. She packed her work bag, left the apartment, drove aimlessly for an hour, parked in the Whole Foods lot and just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, mouth dry. She had left a quiet man with a steady life, for a loud boy with nothing but abs and a Google Calendar full of chest days. And now, she couldn't go back. Not because of pride. Because she didn't know who she'd be returning to. She assumed I'd still be waiting. In grief. In mourning. Maybe even grateful if she changed her mind. But she hadn't noticed something crucial. While she was chasing Spark, I lit the fuse. It came on a Tuesday, one of those boring, gray-skied weekdays where nothing dramatic ever happens until it does. Her name lit up on my phone while I was reading by the fireplace, a glass of wine in hand, a playlist softly humming in the background. I nearly didn't look. I trained myself by then to ignore that particular notification preview. But habit still had its claws. The message was short, neutral, polished. Hey, I hope we can be civil about everything. I miss how peaceful you were. Let me know if you'd be open to coffee sometime. Just to talk. Civil. Peaceful. Coffee. She really thought those words would do the job. No mention of what she'd done. No apology. Not even a sorry for the way it ended. Just peaceful. The word she'd once weaponized against me during arguments. Why are you always so passive? So quiet? Do you even feel things anymore? Now suddenly, that silence she once resented was her siren call. I stared at the screen. Read it twice. Let the message settle like sediment in a glass of water. There was something almost elegant about it. How she was trying to re-enter through the same door she'd slammed shut with heels clicking and her ego on fire. That final sentence, just to talk. That's the one that made me smile. Because just to talk isn't a peace offering. It's a scouting mission. She wanted to know if the bridge she torched had magically rebuilt itself. If the man she left was still standing in the ashes holding out a water bottle. But I wasn't in the ashes. I was across the river with a new home, new boundaries, and better company. I didn't type a word. Not sure, not maybe, not what for. I did exactly what I knew would make her stomach knot. I left it on read. Timestamp clear. Message delivered. Seen. That little gray phrase, read 8:41 p.m., is a scalpel. It cuts quietly, leaves no mess, and says everything without a sound. Because Jade thrived on control. On responses. Even silence from me used to have rhythm, passive-aggressive pauses followed by reluctant texts 2 days later. She knew the dance. But now? Now she was dancing alone. And deep down, she knew what that meant. No reaction wasn't forgiveness. It was dismissal. It wasn't rage. It was irrelevance. Let her wonder what I was doing. Who I was doing it with. Let her imagine me still broken or maybe worse, indifferent. That message sat there, unopened again in her mind, long after it had been read on my phone. And while she stared at her screen, I just poured another glass of wine and turned the page. It wasn't a revenge dinner. Not exactly. I told myself that when I made the guest list, wrote the emails, picked out the wine. It was a celebration, technically. Quiet, elegant, just 8 people around a long oak table in a home with no ghosts in the walls. But there was one invitation that carried more voltage than the rest. I sent it out of politeness. At least, that's what I told myself. Jade. No flowery message. No drama. Just a simple line. Hosting a dinner for a new chapter. You're welcome to join if you'd like. 7 p.m. Thursday. I even put my name at the bottom, though we both knew no one else it could have been from. I figured she'd delete it. Maybe show it to a friend and laugh. Or worse, misread it as desperation. But that wasn't the play. The play was clarity. You see, closure is a myth people use to keep wounds open. I didn't need closure. I needed to let her see what she walked away from. Not the man she left, but the life she forfeited. I set the table myself. 6 plates, 2 spares. Linen napkins. Nothing pretentious. Just enough candlelight to make the wine shimmer. I served grilled sea bass, roasted vegetables, and a lemon tart that Danielle insisted we buy from a bakery she swore by. Danielle came early, wearing a navy pantsuit and bringing her new boyfriend, a startup guy with too much hair and great manners. My friend Alan and his wife. My neighbor, Ruth, who brought fresh-cut dahlias. People who mattered. People who had watched me fall apart quietly and rebuild without asking for applause. Then, at 6:59 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened it, and there she was. Jade, wearing a structured blazer over a low-cut blouse, like she couldn't decide if it was a dinner or a pitch meeting. Her hair was pulled back too tightly. Too much perfume. Same brand, but it clung a little more desperately now. Her smile was brittle. Not the warmth of nostalgia. Just the awkward muscle twitch of someone pretending they belong somewhere they don't recognize anymore. Nice place, she said, stepping inside like a realtor who didn't get the listing. I didn't offer a tour. She looked around, noticed the framed art on the wall, modern, minimal. No traces of the old house, of our things. She walked past the coat rack like she might be looking for a ghost of herself hanging there. Found nothing. And then she saw the guest list. Danielle hugged her briefly, too tightly. Jade pretended not to flinch. Alan gave her a nod that bordered on awkward. The startup guy didn't know who she was and smiled like a Labrador. Ruth said, "Oh, you must be that Jade," and immediately turned to refill her wine. Jade blinked, like someone trying to re-enter a room that had already moved on. "Didn't expect this so fast," she said to me as I handed her a glass of wine. "You were always slow to change." I smiled, warmly even. "Just a little. You taught me how quickly people can flip the script." She opened her mouth, then closed it. And then, as she turned to look toward the kitchen, she saw who else was already there. Not a friend, not a fling, not family. Someone from her world. Someone with unfinished business. Her smile slipped like paint in the rain. And that was when the real dinner began. She stepped in like she still had a key. Like the air would somehow rearrange itself around her, make space, recognize her scent, welcome her back as something more than a ghost in heels. But the house didn't flinch. It was clean, intentional, lived in, but not with the clutter of survival. No piles of unopened mail, no sagging cushions or untouched wine bottles meant to signal, "I'm doing okay." This place didn't scream recovery. It whispered arrival. The lighting was soft, from real lamps, not overheads. Art hung on the walls. Real art. Not mass-produced canvases with inspirational quotes about journeys and storms and sunshine. These were pieces I'd chosen myself. Modern. Sparse. Confident. She paused in the doorway, looking for something familiar to grab onto. But there was nothing. No photo of us. No framed wedding picture repurposed as a funny memory. No shared souvenirs. Even the scent was different. Cedar and citrus, not the vanilla amber she used to drown the old house in. I saw her nostrils twitch, registering that fact. Perfume. Check. Blazer. Check. Posture. Upright. Confident. But the eyes flicked, scanning. She was trying to make it look like curiosity. But it reeked of inventory. "Didn't expect this so fast," she said, slowly making her way to the living room. "You were always slow to change." It was the kind of comment you make when you want someone to feel guilty for improving. Framed like an observation, laced like an insult. I handed her a glass of wine, gestured to the seating area where the others mingled, then looked her right in the eye and said, "You taught me how quickly people can flip the script." Her lips twitched. "Just a millimeter. You have to understand." Jade didn't blink easy. She wasn't the flustered type. She played people like chess, not poker. She liked the long game. The performance. But this room, this house, was off script for her. And she hated improv. She walked slowly past the bookcase, eyes skimming the spines like she might spot something incriminating, some relic of her reign. There was nothing. Just strategy books, memoirs, and a few novels with well-worn spines. No chicken soup for the broken husband's soul. No bitterness framed as enlightenment. She looked back toward the kitchen and froze. Someone had just entered. I saw her shoulders tense, not visibly. Just enough that someone who knew her tells, someone who'd studied them for 20 years, would notice. She covered it fast, turned toward me again. "So, you really started over?" "No," I said, sipping my wine. "I just started." The clink of plates from the kitchen. Soft laughter. Footsteps. Jade glanced over her shoulder, curiosity outweighing caution. And that's when the final guest stepped out. And the air in the room shifted. Jade didn't know it yet, but the ground under her feet was about to collapse. And I wasn't reaching to catch her. The timing couldn't have been better if I'd scripted it, and believe me, I didn't have to. The universe has a knack for poetic timing when your hands stay clean and your ears stay open. The final guest entered from the kitchen just as Jade turned to refill her wine, still clinging to whatever scraps of dignity she thought she was balancing in her designer heels. She was mid-smirk, mid-performance, offering some polished line about how it's just nice to see people living well, you know? And then silence. Not the awkward kind. Not even the dramatic kind. This was the kind of silence that introduces someone. All heads turned. And there she was. Clara Langford. 55. Immaculate. A presence, not a person. hair in a sleek silver twist, navy pantsuit tailored within an inch of its life. She carried a bottle of wine, of course, always prepared to contribute. But her real offering was presence. Jade's face stopped existing for a second. It just froze. Blank. Like her software had crashed mid-boot. Clara greeted me first. No hesitation. No awkwardness. A warm hand on my arm. A kiss on the cheek. A quiet, "It smells incredible in here, Thomas. Thank you for having me. You're the only one I trust with wine this expensive," I smiled. She laughed and took the seat I'd reserved for her, next to mine, right at the head of the table. Jade stood rigid. Her wine glass tilted slightly in her hand, just enough for a drop to land on the rug she'd already mentally decided was too tasteful for me to have chosen on my own. "Clara," she said, voice flat. Not quite a greeting. More like a reflex. Clara glanced up. Cool. Casual. Maybe even amused. "Oh, Jade. I almost didn't recognize you," she said, with that trademark pause just long enough to sting. "You look different." Jade tried to recover, opened her mouth, maybe to explain the obvious question no one asked. Why is she here? But Clara didn't wait. She turned back to me. "This is lovely. So warm. I miss warmth at dinner." I nodded, setting down my glass. "Well, this is the first time in a while where everyone at the table actually wants to be here." Another flicker across Jade's face. Anger? Shame? Fear? Hard to tell when the mask cracks so fast. Danielle leaned toward Jade just then, not maliciously, just helpful. "You two know each other?" Jade didn't answer. "So I did. They worked together," I said simply. "Jade left the company about 6 months ago, right? Wasn't that around when there was that, what did they call it? Personal tension?" Clara chuckled softly. "That's one way to put it. Now, let me explain something. Jade's departure from that firm wasn't a clean exit. She spun it online as a mutual separation due to philosophical differences, but internally, there was a whisper trail. Words like insubordination, ethical concerns, and undermining leadership got passed around. Rumor had it she made a power play, tried to box Clara out of a major client, and it backfired spectacularly. She hadn't quit. She'd stormed out. And now, here was the woman she tried to professionally assassinate, sitting at my table, sipping my wine, laughing at my jokes. Next to me. Not across. Not down. Next to me. Jade sat, finally, in the only open chair, which just happened to be the least visible spot at the table. Not an accident. I didn't gloat. I didn't have to. Her smirk had vanished. And in its place, a silence I hadn't seen on her face since the day she walked out of my life. Because in that moment, she finally realized. She didn't just lose a husband. She lost the narrative. The clink of forks and low murmur of conversation filled the room, nothing forced, nothing tense, at least not for anyone but her. Jade barely touched her plate. Her wine glass stayed half full. She sat stiffly, like a mannequin propped at a table she didn't pick, surrounded by people she used to look down on or simply forget. Everyone else laughed, shared stories, leaned in. She hovered at the edge like a misplaced caption under the wrong photo. Then Clara turned to her, casually but with precision. That unmistakable executive polish. Her tone had that gleam women in power sharpen after decades of being underestimated. "So nice to see you again, Jade," she said across the rim of her wine glass, eyes warm, voice calm. "You look tired." It was delivered like a compliment. Almost. The room paused just enough to register the weight. Jade blinked, once, twice. "It's been a long week." Clara nodded. Long weeks happen when there's cleanup to do. Jade's lip twitched. Her fork hit the plate with the smallest clank. She was cracking. I knew the signs. I raised my glass, slow and deliberate. "To people who stick with you when others don't." It landed like a needle through velvet. Danielle smiled into her napkin. Alan cleared his throat to cover a chuckle. Even Ruth, bless her soul, sipped her wine in exaggerated silence. Jade stood suddenly, clutching her napkin like it might shield her from the air itself. "Well, I shoulda." I tilted my head gently. "Oh, you don't want to miss dessert." She hesitated. "It's lemon tart," I added. Clara brought it. That was the trap. Not loud. Not cruel. Just devastating. Jade froze. She knew. It wasn't about the dessert. It was about the details. Lemon tart, her favorite. Not mine. Never was. I always found it too sharp. She used to buy it from that French bakery on Broad Street, the one that closed last year. I hadn't touched lemon anything since she left. And yet, here it was. Brought by Clara. Brought by her former boss. Brought by the woman she tried to cut out of the company before leaving it in ashes. Jade's voice was low, controlled. How long have you two? I didn't look at her. I just folded my napkin slowly and placed it beside my empty plate. Since the day you left me, I said. Calm. Even. Almost tender. Turns out, I continued, when one person walks away, someone better might walk in. She didn't sit back down, but she didn't move either. Her hand gripped the back of the chair, knuckles white, like it might anchor her to something that hadn't been real for a long time. No one said a word, because there was nothing left to say. Her illusion, this fantasy of a man still broken, still waiting, shattered in front of a table full of witnesses. And the worst part? She'd invited herself. She didn't slam the door. That would have required conviction, some final note of control, some last-ditch display of fire. But there was no fire left. Just the hollow shuffle of heels across the tile, the slow pull of the front door, and a soft click that sounded more like resignation than exit. No goodbyes. No, we'll talk. No parting jab. Just the scent of her perfume trailing behind like an old headline no one read anymore. From the window, I saw her pause at her car. She stood beside it, hand on the handle, staring through the glass, not at the street, but at her own reflection. Not the confident woman from her rooftop selfies. Not the fire starter from her new chapter posts. Just a woman looking at someone she didn't recognize anymore. She got in, but didn't start the engine. Just sat there. Still. Inside, the kitchen hummed with life. Clara was plating the lemon tart, cracking jokes about a silent auction we both knew she'd manipulated the board into winning. Danielle passed around more wine, laughing, animated, absolutely alive. Her boyfriend asked if the tart was homemade. Clara just smirked and said, close enough. Alan leaned in and said quietly, you okay? I nodded. But more than that, I felt present. Anchored. This table, this night, was mine. Built, not inherited. Chosen, not stumbled into. I poured coffee for Ruth, refilled Danielle's glass, and sat down again. Clara's hand grazed mine as I passed the sugar. It was brief. Intentional. Familiar. There was warmth here now. And peace. Real peace. Not the brittle, performative kind Jade posted about with filtered beach sunsets and misattributed quotes. Not the kind you get from running fast enough to outrun your shame. This was the kind of peace that stays. I looked at the people around me. These weren't replacements. They were reinforcements. Not new characters cast in a drama I'd lost. Just real people, showing up without needing me to explain why I rebuilt, why I stayed quiet, why I never fired back. Across the room, the lemon tart gleamed under the pendant light. I didn't even like lemon, but tonight, it was perfect. And as I lifted my fork, I thought about those words, her parting shot that night at our old dinner table. I've had enough. She meant it to hurt. She meant it to cut me down, to make me feel small, invisible. But what she gave me that night wasn't loss. It was permission. Permission to let go. To strip the rust from my life. To stop fighting for someone who was already halfway out the door. And to build something that, frankly, she never would have understood. So yeah, she had enough. But me? I had everything. The sound of her laughter hit harder than any slap. It wasn't even loud, just soft, dripping with mockery, cushioned by the hiss of the shower. Glenn stood frozen in the hallway like some pathetic museum exhibit titled, Husband, 62, realizes he's been a joke. One hand still damp from washing the dinner dishes she hadn't touched. The other clutching the edge of the doorway, knuckles white, eyes locked on the partially open bathroom door. She didn't see him. She never really did these days. But she definitely heard someone. Don't be mad. It's not cheating if you never turn me on anyway. Then laughter. Hers. Then his. Male voice. Muffled through the speaker, but the tone was clear. Arrogant. Comfortable. Like he'd been there before. Glenn blinked. Not in disbelief. That would have required surprise, and he was long past that. No, this was the blink of a man who'd mentally rehearsed this moment 100 times, but never really thought it would arrive. Like a fire drill that turns into the real thing. No smoke, no flames, Just cold air and a gnawing sense of finally. He didn't barge in, didn't yell, didn't smash the door open with some righteous fury like the movies told him men do. Instead, he turned slowly, walked to the kitchen, and dried his hands with that stupid towel that said, "Live, laugh, love." Claire had bought it last Christmas after one of her retail therapy binges. He folded the towel, placed it on the counter, and opened the drawer next to the oven, the one she never touched because it held boring stuff. Tax receipts, old warranties, expired coupons, and one thing more, an envelope, cream-colored, sealed, no name on it. Just wait. He'd written it last year, the night she came back from yoga, smelling like sandalwood and vodka, humming a tune she hadn't heard on the radio since her 20s. That night he'd gone to the guest room and stayed there 3 days. She hadn't noticed until she needed someone to fix the water heater. He walked into their bedroom, their marital bed, a museum now too, with its untouched pillows and her silk robe tossed across his side like a marker for the man who used to exist there. He placed the envelope on her pillow, dead center. Then he opened the bottom drawer of his armoire, one she never had reason to go through, and pulled out a small black key fob. Tapped the button once. A red light blinked on the corner of his nightstand. Finally, he walked out the front door without making a sound, stepped into his truck, and turned the ignition without looking back. She was still laughing in the bathroom, but the punchline had already changed. Claire came out wrapped in a towel that wasn't hers. Glenn always hated those plush spa-style ones she insisted on buying, said they were too soft to actually dry anything. She bought them anyway, like most things. Like the crystal wine decanter they'd never used. Like the gym membership she hadn't touched until she started going with Bryce. The steam rolled behind her like theater fog, and she half-hummed whatever song her little affair buddy had played through the speaker earlier. Her skin glowed. Her smile lingered. She was still smiling when she turned the corner into the kitchen, until she realized it was silent. No pans sizzling. No plates set. No Glenn. For a half-second, she thought maybe he'd stepped out to grab dessert. Or wine. Or one of those bland frozen lasagnas he weirdly liked. But then she saw the envelope on the edge of the kitchen island. Not in the mailbox. Not tucked somewhere casual. Front and center. The handwriting wasn't messy. It was surgical. Precise. Claire had seen it before, back when Glenn used to handle the family bills in his navy blue ledger. Before online banking. Before he became boring. She opened it with a smirk forming. Maybe he was trying to be dramatic? Leave some passive-aggressive message about her forgetting their anniversary again? That would be so Glenn. The note inside was just one line. "Now we're even." She blinked. Turned the paper over. Nothing. But below it, folded once, was a second sheet. Her text log. Printed. Highlighted. Annotated like a middle school English assignment. Yellow for every lie. Red for every time-stamped hotel mention. Blue for the love you messages that were sent while she was supposedly at the market. There were circles, arrows, a little side note in the margin that read, "Gym with Bryce, lasted 17 minutes. Pretty fast cardio, huh?" The smirk evaporated. She dropped the envelope, nearly tripping on the corner of the rug as she bolted toward her phone. The home screen was lit up with missed calls from her sister. She'd ignored them earlier. Claire opened her contacts, tapped Glenn, and hit dial. Straight to voicemail. Again. The third time it didn't even ring. She opened the Find My app, location not available. A flicker of something new crept up her spine. Not guilt. Not sadness. Something colder. Something she wasn't used to. Glenn wasn't just gone. Glenn had turned himself off. No social media. No financial pings. Nothing on the shared calendar. He wasn't at work. He'd taken time off. She remembered. She texted, "We need to talk. Where are you?" No response. The quiet around her grew louder. The fridge hum. The tick of the wall clock. The shower still dripping in the background like a metronome counting down. Claire looked back at the envelope. At her own words printed like evidence. And she finally noticed the handwriting on the front. For when the game stops being fun. Her fingers hovered over her phone again, this time to call her mother. But for some reason, she didn't hit dial. Not yet. Claire stood in the self-checkout line at Ridgeway Market, cradling overpriced almond milk, 2 bottles of Shiraz, and a bouquet of roses she wasn't sure who they were for anymore. Probably herself. Sympathy roses. She scanned each item with shaky hands, still glancing at her phone every 5 seconds. No reply from Glenn, no read receipts. Just silence. Maybe he was playing some kind of weird moral chess game. Give her a scare. Make her sweat. She could sweet-talk her way out of that. She always did. Total, $86.12. She pulled out the gold card with the raised initials, C.M. Claire Marie Mercer. Slid it in. Declined. A soft beep. Then nothing. She frowned, took a breath, and did what any suburban narcissist would do, tried again. Declined. The register asked if she wanted to try another form of payment. The woman behind her was already sighing, clearly regretting picking this line. Claire's throat tightened. She opened her banking app to transfer funds. Login screen. Weird. It usually stayed logged in. She typed her password. Error. Account access restricted. She tried again. Same thing. She navigated to the forgot password page, tried to reset. This user ID is not associated with an active profile. Now the sighing woman behind her had backed up. Claire grabbed her things and stepped aside, tossing the roses in the trash can next to the exit. In the car, AC blasting despite the chill, she called the bank. The hold music was some instrumental flute loop that made her want to punch a bird. Finally. Thank you for holding. This is Michelle at First Unified. Can I help you today? Yes, this is Claire Mercer. My account's locked. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Michelle's tone changed with the speed of someone reading a file in real time. Mrs. Mercer. Yes, I see here. There was a legal hold initiated by the secondary account holder under an emergency separation clause. Looks like prior authorization was filed in February. February? What clause? What are you talking about? Michelle cleared her throat. It's part of a preemptive asset protection package. The account holder, Mr. Glenn Mercer, triggered the clause. It restricts joint funds during cases of suspected fraud, abuse, or marital instability. I can provide a reference number if your attorney. I don't have an attorney. Understood. Unfortunately, due to the clause, your access has been suspended pending resolution or court clarification. I'm sorry. Click. Claire sat in the parking lot, phone slowly lowering from her ear like it weighed 20 pounds. He'd filed in February. Back when she thought he was too dumb to notice she never came home with groceries. Back when she was inventing business brunches and burnout weekends with Bryce. He hadn't said a word. Not a raised voice. Not a passive jab. Not a single warning. He'd been planning, strategizing, quietly mapping her exits before she even knew she wanted one. And she'd walked straight into the blueprint. She opened her phone again. Tried to PayPal herself from their emergency fund. Error. Account suspended. She finally dialed her mother. Claire? What's wrong? You sound. Glenn froze everything, Claire said, voice tight. The accounts, the app, he even filed something back in February. He's been planning this. There was a pause. A long one. And her mother said, slowly, well? I guess he wasn't as dumb as you always said he was. Then the line went dead. Claire's hand shook as she yanked her MacBook from the dining room buffet drawer. The same drawer Glenn used to keep the corkscrew in. She'd always told him it was a clutter magnet. Funny, right now, it was the only place that felt remotely like hers. The screen blinked to life, password field glowing. She typed fast, no Face ID today. Too risky. No time. First stop, messages. She clicked through every thread with names she'd renamed to Karen, book club, trainer notes, conference call. Dozens of them. Some weren't even real names. She opened one, Jill, Pilates, only to see photos from that hotel room in Baltimore. Her in that cheap lace set she told Glenn was a gift for herself. Him, Bryce, half naked, holding a champagne flute like some mid-tier gigolo. Delete. 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 She moved like she was defusing a bomb, racing against a clock that no one had set but that she could feel ticking beneath her skin. She hit Settings, tapped iCloud, unpaired the device. Logged out. Wiped Safari history. Cleared cache. Deleted notes. Erased voice memos. Then, just to be safe, she opened her hidden album and trashed everything in it. She sat back, chest heaving, feeling a sliver of control again. And then her email pinged. Subject, remote device activity detected. Sender, Mercer Legal Holdings at protonmail.com. She opened it. It wasn't a warning. It was a summary. Remote sync completed. Messages.db. Media/photos. Voicemails. Memo _ 2023-10-04 therapy session.wave. Voice message _ Claire to mother.mp3. Chat transcripts redacted.html. Backup hash authenticated. File securely stored on external RAID. Redundant copy timestamped. Her vision tunneled. The therapy session. She remembered it too clearly now. That late October night. She'd had a glass of wine, and in a burst of irritation, she recorded her session with Dr. Morris. She'd vented about Glenn like he was a houseplant that refused to die, called him sexless, dull, a weight. And apparently she'd saved it in a folder she'd forgotten to lock. He hadn't. Claire frantically opened Finder. Typed therapy. Nothing. Typed Glenn. One result popped up. Mercer _ folder _ dio _ not _ touch. She clicked. Password prompt. She guessed 3 times. All wrong. Another ping. New email. No subject. No text. Just an attachment. She opened it. A zip file labeled Claire _ evidence _ package _ 1. Inside. Screenshots of her text to Bryce, annotated. Her call log with Bryce's contact labeled emergency vet. Her voicemails transcribed. One of them said, "Just keep quiet about Saturday. Glenn's too dumb to connect anything unless it's laminated and color-coded." And it was. Every file was sorted into folders. Labeled. Documented. Timestamps. One folder was called Legal Use Only. Another, Claire's Lies, cross-referenced. She slammed the laptop shut, like closing it would undo what was already beyond control. Her mouth was dry. Her head pounding. It wasn't damage control anymore. It was containment. And Glenn hadn't just seen the fire. He'd built a sprinkler system around it while she danced with matches. Claire had never been the kind of woman who made friends easily. She collected them, curated, really, like seasonal handbags. One for wine nights, one for sympathy brunches, a few for passive-aggressive yoga sessions where gossip substituted for stretching. They weren't soulmates, but they served their purpose. They validated her choices. They laughed at her jokes. And most importantly, they all agreed Glenn was sweet, but forgettable. Now, none of them were picking up. She tried Melissa first. Melissa had been her go-to for years. A divorcee who once got half a lake house and a BMW just by crying during a mediation session. Claire figured she'd understand. No answer. Tried again. Voicemail. "Hey Mel, it's Claire. I need to talk. Something's going on with Glenn. Call me." Then Lindsay. The one who called Glenn the stable one, while pouring vodka into her green juice. Straight to voicemail. Tamara? Blocked. She didn't even know that was a thing real people did. She sat on the couch, feet tucked under her like a teenager who didn't know where to go when prom got canceled. She scrolled through her contacts, hesitating. Her finger hovered over Sarah K. Temple. Sarah was the last person she wanted to call. Too judgmental. Too grateful for the little things. Always posting photos of her dog and that bald husband with captions like still choosing each other. Gross. But Claire tapped call anyway. A long ring. Then, Claire. The voice wasn't warm. It was clinical. "Oh my God, finally. Everyone's ghosting me. I don't know what the hell Glenn is doing. He's pulling all this crazy stuff with the bank and..." Sarah cut her off. "He sent us the screenshots." Claire went silent. Sarah continued, voice tight, like she didn't even want to be having this conversation. "The one where you called him dead wood in a cashmere sweater. The one where you laughed about cheating after he paid off your sister's hospital bill." Claire's mouth opened, then closed. "I didn't know he didn't say." "He didn't have to say anything, Claire. You made a group chat about humiliating him. You said he cried at night over the dog dying. And you mocked him for it. You joked he probably cried harder for the dog than you." Sarah paused. The line was deadly quiet now. "You're not the victim here." Claire whispered. "You don't understand what our marriage was like." "Maybe not," Sarah said. "But I do understand who paid for my husband's car to get repaired after he lost work. It wasn't you." Click. Claire sat motionless. Phone still pressed to her cheek like the call was ongoing. She stared at the coffee table. At the bottle of Shiraz she never opened. At the half-burned lavender candle she used to set the mood during FaceTime calls with Bryce. Her network wasn't just gone. It had flipped. These women weren't friends anymore. They were witnesses. And she was the punchline in a joke no one was laughing at anymore. Claire stood on the front steps of the Lakeview condo, blinking in the afternoon glare like someone waking up from a long, nauseating dream. Same building, same landscaping, same decorative stone planter she'd tripped over last summer while tipsy off sangria. It was all exactly as she remembered it, except the keypad was blinking red. Denied. She typed it again, slower this time. The same 4-digit code she'd chosen years ago, 1031. Halloween, because nothing scarier than a joint mortgage. She used to laugh about that. Access denied. Claire scowled. Pressed the intercom. It crackled but didn't connect. She knocked, then banged. And that's when she saw them. Through the wide glass front door, 2 people she didn't recognize. A young couple, maybe mid-30s. She in yoga pants, him holding a box labeled books, his. They looked at her like she was a confused delivery driver. The woman smiled politely but didn't move. The man just tilted his head, confused. Claire knocked harder. This is MY home. Open the door. They didn't. The woman hesitated, then reached for a remote on the table and pressed something. The electronic blinds slowly began to descend. Claire stood there, palm still pressed to the glass as her own life got shuttered in front of her. She yanked out her phone, dialed building management. Silverwood Leasing. This is Trina. How can I help? Yes, hi. There's been a mistake. My code isn't working. I'm at 6F, the Lakeview condo, and there are strangers inside my home. A pause. Then some clicking. Name. Claire Mercer. More typing. Then the voice returned, chipper but ice cold. Oh, Mrs. Mercer. The lease for Unit 6F was terminated last week by the majority title holder. Claire blinked. What majority holder? Mr. Glenn Mercer. Paperwork was processed 3 days ago. He had exclusive cell rights on the unit and opted for a private sublease agreement. The new tenants are protected under a 12-month contract. That's not possible, Claire said, voice rising. My name is on everything. No, ma'am, it isn't. The original co-tenancy ended under an asset protection restructure Glenn submitted via Clause 8A in the deed. He retained 70% interest due to premarital investment. You were listed as co-resident, not co-owner. Her knees wobbled. She grabbed the steel railing to steady herself. Where's my stuff? She croaked. The voice on the phone shifted, slightly softer now. Your personal belongings were boxed and sent to the shipping address on file. I believe it was a storage unit in Dunham. No one told me. We sent 2 certified letters. Both signed for. Claire didn't remember signing anything. Then again, she didn't remember a lot of things lately. The line disconnected. She turned and looked around. No one was watching. No one noticed. A few kids played with scooters on the sidewalk. A dog barked in the distance. The world had the audacity to keep spinning while she stood there in last season's boots, holding a knockoff Chanel bag full of expired lipsticks and receipts from a life that had already ended. She screamed. Not words. Not a name. Just raw, helpless noise. A neighbor across the street glanced over, then walked back inside. Claire stood in the middle of the sidewalk, surrounded by a neighborhood that no longer had a place for her. Not even a doormat. Claire walked into the conference room at McAllister in row and heels that pinched. She hadn't worn them in over a year, but she needed height. Something, anything, to make her feel grounded again. The paralegal led her in without small talk. Just a nod toward the long walnut table. Glenn was already there. Alone. No lawyer. No assistant. No moral support. Just him. A man who'd once cried at that damn Subaru commercial and spent 2 years building their front porch himself. Now he sat with a single manila folder in front of him, perfectly centered, as if even chaos had to be symmetrical in his world. He didn't stand when she entered, just looked up. No hate in his eyes. No anger. That almost made it worse. Claire, he said simply. She sat down slowly, across from him, waiting for a barrage. A lecture. A rant. But Glenn just opened the folder and slid a stack of papers toward her. On top, a printed timeline. Go ahead, he said, his voice calm. That's the breakdown. Month by month. Of when you stopped seeing me as a man, and I started seeing you as a liability. She stared at him, lips parting. Excuse me. But he didn't repeat himself. Her eyes dropped to the timeline. June 2022. Canceled anniversary dinner. Not feeling well. GPS later showed Claire's phone pinged at a rooftop bar. August 2022, Glenn's cancer scare. Claire's calendar note. Don't forget Sympathy Act. November 2022, Glenn pays off Claire's sister's $9,200 hospital bill. Claire texts Bryce. Now he really thinks he's a hero. LOL. February 2023, Claire initiates secret transfer of $14,300 to private investment account under the name Bryce Dunn, LLC. April 2023, Claire records therapy session. Complains Glenn is like a walking beige cardigan. Each entry had receipts, screenshots, notations, even call logs cross-referenced with her supposed yoga class attendance. She looked up, jaw clenched. You stalked me. Glenn leaned back, folding his hands over his stomach like he was settling in for a weather report. No, I documented you. Stalking is for people who still hope to be loved. I was just making sure the math added up. Claire flipped to the next section. Statements from Dr. Morris, her therapist. Notes Glenn had legally requested via subpoena once the therapy session file appeared in his possession. Her own words quoted verbatim. He's so small. Not physically, just as a presence. He's not a husband. He's a tax deduction in khakis. I said those things in private, she snapped. And you recorded them illegally. Then saved them under my vents. I didn't breach your privacy, Claire. You breached your own. The next page showed a financial heat map of transfers. Her Amazon splurges, Bryce's Zelle requests. A spike in withdrawals every time Glenn had a medical procedure. I covered everything, Glenn said. While you were building a parallel life on my dime. I just itemized it. Like an accountant. Claire's hands trembled as she flipped to the last sheet. It was titled, Restitution Proposal. He was offering her a settlement. Generous, even. But with terms. No claim to his pension. No access to the property he'd inherited from his father. A gag clause prohibiting her from speaking about their marriage publicly, in writing, or via social media. Bryce's legal name included in a formal no-contact order. She swallowed hard. This is revenge. Glenn gave the softest smile she'd ever seen on him. Almost sympathetic. No, Claire. This is me paying the bill for your freedom. Then he stood up, placed his pen neatly beside the folder, and walked toward the door. He paused once, hand on the knob. You used to say I was boring. Unimaginative. That I'd never surprise you. He turned his head slightly, just enough for her to catch his eye. Well, he said, surprise. And then he was gone. Claire didn't want to be there. The conference room felt colder this time, even though nothing had changed. Same minimalist decor, same sterile carafe of untouched water, same damn ticking wall clock that Glenn had once complimented for its reliable rhythm. But this time, Glenn wasn't alone. A woman in a slate gray suit sat beside him, his attorney, clearly. Young, sharp, with a coiled braid and eyes that read people like resumes. Across from them, Claire sat alone. Her own lawyer had been a no-show, claiming scheduling conflict. Truth was, Claire had maxed out what little trust she had left with everyone, including professionals. The monitor on the far wall blinked to life. The attorney pressed a button. We've prepared a visual summary, she said flatly. Claire opened her mouth to object. A visual summary? What the hell does that even mean? But the screen was already rolling. The first clip was grainy, captured from a hallway camera outside a hotel room. There she was, red trench coat, laughing. Bryce's hand on her lower back. They disappeared into room 416. Clip 2. Same hotel, different night. Different dress. Same man. Clip 3. Audio overlay. Her voice confident, cutting. He's like a faded painting. No color left. I feel like a widow married to a wax figure. Clip 4. Bryce, on a restaurant patio, feeding her a bite of his steak. She giggled, wiped his lip, said, if Glenn ever knew, he'd probably offer to drive us home and thank us for being honest. Glenn didn't react. Not a blink. He sat with his fingers tinted under his chin, calm as a monk. Claire, meanwhile, was unraveling. All right, enough, she said, rising halfway. We've established I made mistakes. I was lonely. I was ill. The lawyer lifted a finger. One more clip. The screen switched to a living room. Claire's mother was there, Mrs. Callahan, wearing that oversized cashmere sweater she always claimed was heirloom Scottish. Claire sat beside her, wine glass in hand. "So how's Glenn doing?" her mother asked, eyes half rolling. Claire snorted. "Oh, he had a cancer scare or something. Probably just acid reflux. But you should have seen the drama." "Did he cry?" Claire laughed so hard she nearly spilled her wine. "Like a toddler who dropped his ice cream. I had to bite my cheek not to burst out laughing." Silence. Glenn still didn't move. Claire's lips parted. That was private." His attorney replied, "Your mother had the same smart TV as your condo. Glenn managed the installation." "Forgot." Claire's knees buckled, but she stayed upright. "Barely." She tried to speak, but no sound came. The last frame on the video was a freeze frame, her face mid-laugh, her mother's face smug, and the subtitle still lingering. "I had to bite my cheek not to burst out laughing." Then the screen went black. Claire sat. Slowly, her hands trembling so badly the water glass rattled. She reached for it, missed. Glenn finally spoke. Quietly. Measured. "I told you once that I was scared to die alone." She looked up at him, eyes already wet. "You made sure I didn't fear that anymore," he said. "Because it turns out I already was." He rose without waiting for a response. The attorney gathered the folder. Claire sat there, sobbing now, the sound muffled by her own hand over her mouth. No one offered her a tissue. No one said a word. The envelope was thick. Not dramatically so, Glenn was never theatrical, but weighty in the way that matters. Claire sat across from him again, same conference room, now feeling like a confession booth that served coffee. This time, the screen stayed off. No footage. No evidence. Just 2 pins, 1 document, and the ghost of everything she used to control now sitting smugly in a chair wearing a faded flannel in absolute power. He pushed the envelope toward her gently, as if offering tea. "Final version," he said. "Reviewed. Notarized. It's clean. Generous. But conditional." She opened it with the hands of someone defusing a landmine. First page, settlement terms. She keeps the Audi. She keeps the jewelry he'd given her over the years, excluding the vintage ring from his grandmother. She keeps the rental property in Traverse City, but Glenn would retain the primary condo and all ownership of the duplex in Charleston. Monthly stipend for 1 year. One-time tax-free payout. 6 figures. Comfortable. Not luxurious. But the bolded line beneath caught her eye. In exchange, Claire Mercer agrees to forfeit all claims to Mr. Mercer's pension, retirement accounts, and shares in Mercer Tools and Iron Works, LLC. Claire's eyes narrowed. "That company was built during our marriage." "Yes," Glenn nodded. "And you called it adorable when I worked on it every Saturday while you were wine tasting with clients. You also said, quote, 'I'd rather eat drywall than hear about torque wrenches ever again.'" She stayed quiet. He continued, tone steady. "That company paid your sister's bills, your retreats, your so-called marketing seminars. You once flew to Palm Springs for branding inspiration and came back with a sunburn and a lower back tattoo you still pretend was henna." Claire opened her mouth, closed it again. "It paid," Glenn said softly, "for your other life." She flipped further. "Another condition. Non-disparagement clause. Both parties agree not to speak publicly or privately in a defamatory or negative manner regarding one another, including on social media, podcasts, written memoirs, therapy forums, or future romantic partners." "You're muzzling me," she said, voice barely above a whisper. He leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "You were willing to burn it all for a laugh, Claire. A punchline. I'm not punishing you. I'm capping the damage. You walk with a fraction, and your silence." Her face flushed. "You don't want justice. You want control." "I wanted dignity," Glenn said. "You voted against that." Repeatedly. He slid the pen toward her. She didn't touch it. "You always said I was passive," he added. "That I just absorbed whatever storm you brought home. You called me a sponge once. Remember?" Claire's throat closed. "Well," Glenn said, standing, "sponges eventually reach capacity. Then they drip." He walked to the window, hands in his pockets. Looked out at the city like it owed him nothing. She signed, shaking, 1 letter at a time. Because the room wasn't just silent. It was sealed. The room was still. The kind of still you earn. Glenn stirred at 6:12 a.m., not because of an alarm, but because his body had relearned peace. No weight in his chest. No tension in his jaw. The air smelled like pine and lemon oil. His new cabin sat just outside Braddock Lake, where cell reception came and went like migrating birds. He rolled over and tapped his phone awake. 324 missed calls. He didn't flinch. A few voicemails. Text stacked like a digital avalanche. Please. We need to talk. I made a mistake. Why are you doing this? You said you'd never abandon me. Then the strange ones. The bargaining ones. Just tell me what to say in court. I'll do anything. He didn't mean anything to me, Glenn. It was just noise. Noise. Glenn exhaled slowly, like a man tasting air after surfacing too long underwater. He scrolled, barely reading. Her words weren't even painful anymore. They were echoes. The voice of someone who once sat across the breakfast table critiquing his toast spread, now begging for scraps of forgiveness she never learned how to give. He opened the message app. Typed slowly. No drama. No monologue. Just the truth. I gave you everything. You gave me a punchline. He didn't wait for a reply. He tapped the top of the screen. Selected info. Scrolled. Pressed block this caller. Then delete contact. Confirm. Gone. Claire Mercer no longer existed in his digital world. And soon, not in any other. Glenn set the phone down and walked outside to the deck. The morning fog was lifting off the lake like smoke from an old life. Ducks floated past, unbothered. Inside, a fresh pot of coffee bubbled. He didn't smile. Didn't raise a glass. Didn't give the movie ending. He just sat down quietly, took a sip, and let the silence stay uninterrupted. Because this silence wasn't empty. It was earned.